when you come out of college, the only thing you should know is what you don't know. I had 4 different placements, which I excelled at, but none of which made me happy. I did a little placement in hand therapy and I was like, actually, I think that this could be my spot. And he bought me a card and he said, you're the first person who spoke to me and told me that I had the power. And now other rehab professionals are going, oh, well, actually, we should be going for the patient goals. And you're like, that's a really good idea. I wonder where you heard that from.
I'm Martina Tierney, Occupational Therapist and Clinical Director here at Seating Matters. And I'm delighted to sit down today with Karen Murphy, who is a contributor to the new book, The Power of OT, which we're going to talk about. So I want to welcome you, Karen, to Seating Matters and to your podcast.
Thanks very much. It's lovely to be here.
And thank you so much for your contribution to The Power of OT. First of all, just for those who haven't read the book yet or haven't seen the book, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career as an OT. So just start off, what you're doing at the minute.
So at the minute, I'm a certified hand therapist and I own a multidisciplinary allied health professionals clinic here in the northwest of Ireland in Derry. But I started at the turn of the century, I tell our boys, in 2000. I graduated in the University of Ulster and my job wasn't ready. I had a job, but my job wasn't ready. And I started to locum and I realised that there was so many different parts of OT and locumed for 2 years. And then I ended up doing my boards for the United States. I went over to New York. And over there, I was working in general medicine, neurology. I was doing outpatient neuro and started to get an interest in upper limb therapy and had to do really an apprenticeship. And you have to work very hard to do it and then get your certification. So I did that in 2007 along with a master's at the same time. Graduated around the same time in those. And then in 2009, I came home to the Northwest and set up a hand therapy department in one of the trusts here in the Northwest. And I left in the middle of a pandemic because my private practice had increased and myself and a pelvic health physio realised that there was room for people to dip their toes out of the National Health Service and into private practice. So what we've done is we've made an umbrella company where people can rent rooms on whatever terms they like in order to sort of explore whether private practice would be comfortable, uncomfortable, make them happy or fulfil them, really.
Well, you've brought up a few things there, Karen. The first thing is that you tested a whole lot of different things before you settled on hand therapy. So how important is that for OTs that are listening that really haven't really found their niche yet?
Oh, so important. I mean, I'd sort of say that when I was going through occupational therapy, when I was going through my bachelor's, we had 4 placements and it wasn't so much what you were passionate about, it was where you could be. So travel constraints, money constraints, what placements were available. And I know that that's an issue at the present time, even trying to get placements for students. So, I mean, I had 4 different placements, which I excelled at, but none of which made me happy, really lit a fire in me. When I came out of college, actually, that's not true. One of my first placements, the lady who was there, and she was great at the foundations and she was great about how you take information from medical charts, how you write your notes, those foundational things. And she said to me, when you come out of college, the only thing you should know is what you don't know. And that for me sort of went, that's it. I don't know those other parts. So some people started on a rotational band 5 position or junior position. And I didn't do that because I was locuming and I got the taste for that. And I loved being able to explore other places as well as things. And I think that having either a rotational post or exposing yourself to those different specialties and niches, I think gives you a wonderful foundation in teamwork. Teaches you a lot about yourself and how you work with people and patients or clients or whoever it is. And I think that it's to the detriment of our younger therapists that there aren't so many rotational posts around. And I find that I would like to encourage every junior therapist to really expose themselves to everything, because I ended up in none of them. It was one of the one of my locum posts for about 6 weeks in Stafford in England. And I did a little placement in hand therapy, and I was like, oh, this is like, I never went back to it for a while, but when the opportunity then came, I was like, actually, I think that this could be my spot.
Yeah, something that would. A lot of, I have a whole lot of questions for you. They're all coming into my head, so I have to try and sort them out. So one of the things is people are a bit reluctant to go into private practice, but do you think, and this is the bit that I would like to encourage people to just test it out, and that's what you're giving them the opportunity to do. Test it out, stay within the security of their job, but test out private practice and see if that would fit them.
Oh, so much. I feel that it is to the detriment of our profession, the way that the funding and structure of the National Health Service has unfortunately had to go. So I remember in America coming in and going, so Medicare only takes care of washing, not cooking, not anything else. That was the only ADL that Medicare took care of. So, and it didn't matter whether they could get in a bath or shower. If they could strip wash, if they could be clean, that was the only goal, and that was it. And I feel that as we've had waiting lists have got longer, everything, you become a little bit more focused or narrowed in your view. And I found that terribly frustrating. I found that horribly frustrating. So there's lots of things that become narrowed in view. Your skills, your passion, if you're not allowed to be diverse and really do for your client or your patient what their goal is. I find that sad, to be honest.
Because one of the biggest, we just noticed this when we were writing the book, the word that came up the most within the book was holistic.
Yes.
But you're just saying, that's what you're saying now. We're not allowed, a lot of time we're not allowed to be holistic.
We're not allowed to be holistic. We can work on personal care. We can work on discharge planning. We can work on the basics. And I wouldn't like to get to the point where, like in my outpatient practice in the NHS, I did have a carte blanche. I could do what I needed to do for my clients as the service built. But I could imagine a time where, like other outpatient facilities, you could be told that you could only see a patient for six visits, and that's so arbitrary, and it's so against everything that we think and believe and we're taught, and we feel about humans.
Yeah.
And
because that's why I was attracted to you being part of this book, because as I say in the book, you were the first and the only OT that has ever treated me. And I had a wrist injury. And just like what you're saying, you just didn't put me in a little box. When I arrived in, you wrapped the arm, the wrist in a warm blanket. You'll have another name for it. But it felt nice and warm and secure. I just remember the feeling. People say they don't remember what was said, but they remember how you made them feel. So you made me feel very secure, and you wrapped the arm in a blanket, and you just said, so what's the crack? You know, what's going on with you? How are you feeling? Oh my goodness, I have to go to the OT show and I have to do this and I can't. And you just made me feel like a person. So what you're saying a lot of the time on the jobs now in the NHS, because, and it's not the fault of the NHS, it's just the way the funding and everything's going. You don't have the opportunity to do that, whereas you do in your job at the minute.
I do, but I also think that hand therapy, as viewed by other OTs, seems very reductionist or seems very biomechanical. And to me, it's not. It's so not. I can be and I can do and I can think as a team with my client, and hopefully the treating surgeon or the treating or whoever's brought them to me if it's post-op. But even before that, people who are like, after the pandemic, we had so many repetitive strain injuries from people who wanted to work at home and saw the benefit of it, but they're sitting at their kitchen table and they've got this terrible setup. And there was a lot of work to be done with that. And again, it's about their goals. It's about that time after injury or after having sustained something or gathered up a repetitive strain injury. And to me, that's the joy and the beauty of it, you know, and you it's less reductionist, I think, or less biomechanical than people believe it to be. And you can make it as you wish, you know, and that's what I see my OT skills being in hand therapy, it's not so reductionist. When we become hand therapists, OTs learn the physical skills. And if a physio becomes a hand therapist, then they have to learn the splinting and the functional end of things. And I do believe that many rehab professionals are moving towards the functional goals and the functional activities that they're getting people to do. And I feel like we didn't really own it at the start, and we didn't really push it because it seemed like common sense. And I think I said that to you in the book.
I think that's what we called your title of your book.
That's it, but it's not just common sense. No. And I think that because we're in that profession, we think it's so natural to think that way. And people don't. And now other rehab professionals are going, oh, well, actually, we should be going for the patient goals. And you're like, that's a really good idea. I wonder where you heard that from.
That's another theme that came up within the book as I interviewed all the OTs was OTs have a real knack of asking the person what matters to you, what's important to you, what do you want to be able to do? And you did that for me. And all the OTs we interviewed, actually, that was a very recurrent theme. But what I want you to tell me about the lovely story in the book about the young fella that came with the injury. He was working for the electricity board. Tell me about him, because I love that story.
So I had a young person come in to me, and he was a very quietly spoken person. And he sort of was slightly unkempt. He was a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months after an injury, and he had fractured his humerus. And in fracturing his humerus, he had taken out, we call it. He had sustained an injury to his radial nerve. So that's really a wrist drop and a finger drop. So it impairs your grip, but it does everything else. But basically, when you are in hand therapy, you are aware so much of anatomy. You're so aware of dysfunction that comes from certain injuries, and you're aware of perspective of recovery. Okay, so when that fella, we'll just call him a fella because that's what it is to me. He came in to me, and he wasn't shaven. He was a little bit, and when I assess people, then I talk to them about, well, this is what that means. This is our goals. So I say, OT introduced self, role, and goals. Okay, after speaking to the patient. And I said, look, your radial nerve is up here. This is how long it's going to take for recovery, because we know that the nerve hasn't been cut. And talked to him about how he could stimulate muscles, how he could support, and then gave him support for his hand so that he could go through the recovery being functional, not with this dropped wrist. And he sort of went, oh, okay. And he started to brighten, and we took care of him. We gave him those time frames and things like that. And as he went forward, he started to look brighter. He started to look more like he took care of himself, like this and that. And then eventually got him all the way back. And I met him in a shopping centre or a grocery store one time, and he said, do you know, well, when he left, he came in, and I think his mum got it for him, but I might not be sure. He bought me a plant, and he bought me a card, and he said, you're the first person who spoke to me and told me that I had the power, that I had the ability to be aware of how I was going to get better and when it would be, and that I was actually going to get better. Because when I was in the medical field, the medical part of my journey, all they talked about was what was wrong. But you talked about what was right, what was going to be right. And I would still see him about the town, and he would say hello, and he had broken up with his partner, but they got back together after he got better and things like that. He was just really affected by his injury. And that's our power. Our background knowledge is a tool and a strength to give to our clients. And that's what they're lacking. And I always say, like me and you're a team.
That's what I was going to say. I love that you told them that you've now got a team.
That's it. But I say to lots of people, I say, look, I have, what you don't know is that this is normal for me. It's so abnormal to you. You've never done this before. No. Well, I hope they haven't. And it's so different, and it's disabled them in so many ways. And it's so important that we say, look, this is how it usually goes. This is what I see with you. This is how far you are along your journey. This is where the journey ends. And this is about the time frame that's going to happen. And this is how we get there.
Good.
And it's about power of OT.
Giving power of OT. I want to turn to your paragraph or your chapter in your book. And I know you're a hand therapist, but we called your chapter A Dying Wish. And we have a nice sunflowers on it, because when you were in and we were discussing the book, and I was interviewing you for the book, you told me a great story about this a terminally ill man that you worked with in Stoke-on-Trent, I think it was.
Stoke-on-Trent, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, for those who haven't read the book yet, tell us that story about the sunflowers, because it really meant a lot to me, and that's why it features so highly in your book.
Thank you. So we had a gentleman on the ward, and he had no family, and he was in his end stages of palliative care, and he didn't really have functional goals. And this was when the NHS didn't have so many constraints on it. And I was chatting him, and lots of my time was just spent talking to him and reminiscing with him, and it's almost a validation of a life with him, and a life well spent, of course. But all that man wanted to do was go out and see the sunflowers in his greenhouse. And I said to the physio, I said, look, the only thing I can think to do with that man is, can we go out and have a look at the sunflowers and let him tend his sunflowers? And we did. And we arranged patient transport, and you have never seen a man as happy, as ill and as happy. And the smile just was throughout his whole body. And we went out and he took care of his sunflowers. And that was the last act he did in his own home before he passed away.
Well, that certainly is like a story of the heart, isn't it? Because Jonathan, when I was talking to him at the beginning of the podcast, he asked me, about the book and why there was a hand. And I explained that occupational therapy, it's a lot about hand, especially in your job, obviously hand therapist. But it's not just about the hand, you have to have the heart as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that story there that you just told us really shows the heart of the OT as well.
But you'll also see, like, I talk about hands so much. Like, hands are so sensory. Hands are so they're a part of our bodies that's very personal to us, because they are so sensory. And I have so many people who have such a hard time having their hands held or touched. And they can't relax, and it takes quite a lot of talking to somebody, looking them in the eye while you're looking at them, to be able to work on them and to touch them and to feel. But then in my normal life, I'm such a touchy person. And my husband says to me, he's like, you shouldn't be touching them people the way you are. If I'm talking to somebody and I haven't, I just want to touch them, because that's my norm. And I always tell the story. I was in Philadelphia, and I was at a conference, and I was the come up here on the bed and I'll show you what to do. And it was a gentleman by the name of Ken Flowers, a giant in hand therapy. And I was lying on a plinth, and he was showing me something, and somebody asked him a question, and he just held my hand like this here, and he had his arms folded around my hand, and he was talking and answering a question, and I started to laugh because he was holding my hand up here. I was lying down, my hand was being held, and he was like, oh, sorry, because we forget that sometimes, and it's really good to be grounded and to say that these humans don't think about our profession the way that we do, and sometimes it's a little bit of taking somebody into your world and going into theirs, and that's really what I see as the power of OT, because they're in our world too. They do affect us. We have these stories, and we have these patients who will forever be a part of our brain, and they hold a piece of our heart in our brain, and it's holding that piece of our heart that when you have hard professional days, or you have difficulties or struggles or whatever. And I think that when I left a certain job, I think it was, and when I made the leap into private practice, it was because the only joy I had was my clients, was my patients. And when it comes down to that, I think that is when you understand that it's maybe private practice, it's maybe doing the job that you were trained to do that will give you that opportunity to really be delighted in your job. And I do say to my patients, I'm like, I'm at the end of WhatsApp. I can ignore you. That's fine. But don't waste time in your rehab and your recovery by not telling me something that's happened that I could easily address.
Yeah.
You're not waiting to see me the next time, that sort of thing. But I sometimes don't have enough barriers or boundaries, but that's because I love what I do. Yeah. And in allowing people to go into private practice, it allows you to see your your skills, the skills that you've been learning for so many years, and to really give people the power of that knowledge to them, the little piece that's really important to them, give it to them. Let them work with it. Let them recover better with it. And it really is just you can see yourself that you're in the right profession when you understand that you couldn't do anything else. Yeah. That you wouldn't want to. And that's what private practice allows people to do without the constraints of funding and things like that there. And people are understanding. The general public are understanding that, unfortunately, with the budget cuts of public service and public healthcare, they maybe can't get that, and it will take longer to get better, and their lives will be, as you said, I need to go and do this, and this, and I can't see me being able to do that in the time frame that I want to.
I hadn't time to wait.
You didn't, and I'd be the same as yourself.
So you're a great advocate for your patient, of course, and for the profession, and also for private practice. Now, we're not here trying to promote private practice if people are happy in their job and they're finding joy in it. And I think that's how we'll finish, because I at the show yesterday when we were launching the book, I told a story about joy. And I told the story that I watched the film The Bucket List. And the guy on the bucket list, Morgan Freeman, said to Jack Nicholson, there's only 2 things that you'll be asked when you reach the pearly gates. And the first one is, have you found joy in your life? And the second one is, have you brought joy to others? And I said, I have found joy in my life because there is a photograph of a patient sitting really poorly, and there is a photograph of a patient sitting properly in a chair. And that's my joy for me and the joy for them. And I can see that same thing with you. You use that word, joy. Yeah. That's where you get the joy, when you can see a patient rehabilitating, when you can see them getting their life back. You find the joy.
I do. And I say to my patients, I don't want cards, I don't want flowers, I want you to spread your wings and fly. I want you to go and live your life. And that is the joy that I get. And it's so tangible in hand therapy. And it's because I'm an OT.
Karen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Your enthusiasm is definitely contagious. And I definitely recommend you for anybody. I have recommended your services many times, and I would highly recommend it. So again, if anybody is interested in the book, you can get it on seatingmatters.com or martinatierney.com, and I would encourage you to read Karen's chapter because it's very enlightening. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Martina. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.